One of Rome's most powerful men spent his spare moments writing advice to himself, and those private notes still help people stay calm and make better choices today. Marcus Aurelius wore a crown and a cuirass, but his real weapon was a simple practice we now call stoicism, learning to tell apart what you can control, your actions, your thoughts, from what you can't, traffic, other people's moods, the weather. Imagine an emperor pausing between campaigns to jot down, "Don't be angry, think clearly." That's practically a 2-0-year-old life hack. In this video you'll get plain, usable tools from his meditations, how to handle criticism without melting down, how to turn setbacks into small steps forward, and how to make decisions without overthinking. You'll see real-life examples, calming yourself in a commute, keeping cool in a tense meeting, or dealing with a ruined weekend plan. No toga required, just a few practices you can try today, plus a little humor about ancient penmanship and surprisingly modern advice. Stick with me and you'll leave with simple, practical habits to make stress smaller and choices clearer. Marcus Aurelius, the man behind the toga. Marcus Aurelius is often remembered for his private notebooks that later became a guide for how to live calmly and clearly. He wrote short reminders to himself about staying honest, patient, and fair, and those notes were never meant for show. Written in plain language, they read like a modern journal, honest confessions, pep talks, and practical rules for handling daily trouble. Think of someone pausing between meetings to jot down what really matters. That was his method. He combined a strict sense of duty with surprising humility. Rather than grand speeches about glory, his entries focus on doing the next right thing and accepting what you cannot change. This is easy to use today. When a colleague takes credit for your work, focus on your next contribution instead of getting stuck in anger. Short breath. Then action. That tiny shift can change a long, wasted afternoon into a productive one. Practical exercises he used are simple and useful. One is to separate what you can control from what you cannot. If your flight is delayed, you cannot control the delay, but you can control your response, call ahead, read, or use the time to plan. Another practice is writing down faults and virtues, like a checklist, so you notice patterns and improve slowly. These are not high-minded tricks, they are like checking your calendar or making a grocery list, small steps that prevent chaos. His leadership mixed firmness with care. He expected responsibility from himself first, which made it easier to hold others accountable without losing respect. Leaders who listen, own mistakes, and give clear instructions tend to get better results. Picture a coach who trains hard with the team and also asks how everyone is doing. That balance builds trust. He was not perfect, and that honesty is part of his appeal. He struggled with personal losses and the heavy burdens of public life, but he tried to respond with reason rather than rage. That's a useful model, accepting human limits while aiming to improve. Try ending each day with a short note about one small improvement. It's like a personal report card that actually helps you get better. Everyday life can feel noisy, and his methods cut through that noise. Keep a few of his habits, write brief reflections, practice control over reactions, and act with steady purpose. They aren't magic, but they work. And if you ever find yourself lecturing your mirror about patience, at least you'll be in good company. From son of Rome to philosopher-emperor. Born into a well-to-do Roman senatorial family, Marcus Aurelius was shaped from childhood by a mixture of privilege and strict schooling. He studied rhetoric, law, and the moral teachings that mattered most to his circle. A key influence came from Junius Rusticus, who steered him toward the Stoic teachings of Epictetus, ideas that would later fill the private pages he titled Meditations. This was no academic hobby. The lessons were practical tools for running an empire and staying sane in the chaos that came with it. He took Stoicism not as a set of dry rules but as an everyday guide. The main idea was simple: concentrate on what you can control and let go of what you cannot. If a courier is late, you do not squander your day fretting. If a colleague snaps at you, you choose how to respond instead of reacting blindly. Think of it like an inner thermostat that keeps your emotions from boiling over. Virtue, meaning honesty, courage, justice, and self-control, was treated as the true measure of a person, higher even than fame or comfort. That made decisions easier. Oddly enough, because the question became not what will make me look good, but what is the right thing to do. His personal habits showed how philosophy moved from theory into practice. He wrote short, blunt reminders to himself, moral checklists and reflections, often while on campaign or in the heat of difficult choices. Journaling played the role of mental sharpening. He practiced negative visualization, picturing losses or setbacks so that when trouble arrived it felt familiar and manageable. Simple and effective. A modern manager could borrow the same move. Imagine a project going wrong, rehearse your response, and you'll be calmer if the problem shows up. Stoic training also encouraged brief pauses before speaking, turning immediate outrage into thoughtful answers. This is why many people find his writings less like ancient lectures and more like a coach whispering, think, breathe, act. The mix of immense responsibility and steady inward work shaped a ruler who tried to lead by example. Duty came first, self-interest came second. He believed power should serve the common good, and that leadership required patience, restraint, and a constant check on pride. Translation for everyday life: a boss who listens, a parent who models calm, a community member who chooses fairness over short-term gain. Those are practical applications, not lofty slogans. Even modern psychologists recognize overlap between these techniques and therapies that help people change unhelpful thoughts. So when life delivers a rude email or a stalled train, Marcus's approach is to note the emotion, examine the thought behind it, and then pick a constructive step forward. He'd likely tell you, with a wry smile, to stop doom-scrolling and write a clear to-do list instead. The Meditations, a scientific popular snapshot. Marcus Aurelius left behind a set of private notes that read less like polished philosophy and more like a personal workshop manual for living. These pages, grouped under the name We Know, function as bite-sized reminders: control your thoughts, act with purpose, accept what you cannot change. They were written to shape everyday behavior rather than to build a grand theory, and that practical tone is what makes them easy to relate to now. At the heart of the text is a simple practice: treat your mind like something you can train. When a thought drifts toward anger, notice it, label it, and choose a different one. That sounds formal, but it's like catching yourself before you send a snarky reply to a coworker and instead typing a calm sentence. Another repeated idea is negative visualization, briefly imagining small losses so you can appreciate what you have and be less shocked if trouble comes. It's not morbid, it's like mentally rehearsing a flat tire so you don't panic when it happens. Short exercises like this build mental habits the way doing push-ups builds muscle. Modern psychology often arrives at conclusions that echo these notes, and the parallels are practical. Cognitive behavioral approaches teach that changing how you think changes how you feel, which is basically the same advice in plain clothes. Mindfulness research shows that attention can be trained, and that steady attention reduces emotional reactivity. Put another way, if your mind is constantly pulled by every notification, a few deliberate breaths and a moment of perspective can reduce that tight, frazzled feeling, just as the notes suggest when they advise stepping back and asking, "Is this within my control?" Turning the ideas into daily routines is straightforward. Start the day with a short list: one value to keep in mind, one action you'll take, one attitude to remember. In the evening, jot down where you lost your cool and what you could try next time. Practice a pre-meeting reset by reminding yourself of the desired outcome instead of rehearsing imagined slights. These tiny, repeated acts change how you respond to stress, and they don't require heroism, only attention and a little persistence. The tone throughout is humane and often wry. The writer knows that people are messy and that self-improvement is a slow climb. Think of these notes as a coach who speaks plainly: do the work, expect setbacks, laugh at yourself when appropriate. Progress is incremental, not dramatic. A few simple shifts in how you see events and in small daily routines can make your life steadier, and that's the most useful takeaway for readers today. Stoicism explained for curious minds. Stoicism teaches that a calm life comes from knowing what you can change and what you cannot. Central to the practice is the simple idea that your actions and judgments are within your control, while other people's reactions, the weather, traffic, and the past are not. The school of thought emphasizes 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance as the real goods that guide right action. These are not abstract ideals, they are practical habits you can practice every day, like choosing honesty at work or holding your temper in a tense conversation. Emotions are seen as responses tied to our judgments about events, not direct results of the events themselves. When you tell yourself that being passed over for a promotion means you are worthless, that judgment makes the pain worse. If you instead label it as disappointing but useful information, the sting lessens and you can plan the next move. Try it with small stuff first. When your coffee spills, note the thought, "This is annoying," and then choose a helpful response rather than a dramatic one. It's like training a pet, consistency wins, and treats help. Stoicism offers simple, everyday exercises to build mental habits. One practice is a brief morning review. Pick your top priorities and remind yourself of what's in your control. Another is a nightly reflection. Write down what went well, what you could improve, and where you let emotions drive you. A third is voluntary discomfort. Skip a creature comfort now and then, or take a cool shower, to reduce dependence on comforts and to remember resilience. And a useful cognitive trick is negative visualization. Briefly picture losing what you value so you appreciate it more now. This isn't pessimism, it's gratitude with a safety net. The tradition also gives modern tools for life today. Many therapists point out that Stoic techniques shaped cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps people change unhelpful thoughts and behaviors. If you deal with social media rage, workplace stress, or parenting challenges, Stoic practices help you pause, name the judgment, and choose an action aligned with your values. Famous practitioners wrote private notes as guides for themselves. That same habit of journaling can keep you grounded. Stoicism is not about becoming a robot. It's about getting better at being human, less reactive, more purposeful, and oddly enough, often more cheerful about life's small absurdities. Roman political culture and philosophical power. Marcus Aurelius stands out because he mixed private reflection with public responsibility, writing a series of personal notes that reveal how he tried to bring Stoic ideas into everyday rule. Stoicism, in plain terms, teaches attention to what you can control, acceptance of what you cannot, and steady effort to act well, qualities that fit oddly well with the grind of running a big, complicated state. He didn't present philosophy as an abstract hobby, he used it as a toolkit for tempering anger, making decisions, and keeping a sense of duty when things got messy. Think of it like a manager carrying a notebook of rules to keep calm during a company crisis. Roman political culture prized reputation, precedent, and the ability to persuade others more than sheer force. Social standing and moral influence, what Romans called auctoritas, often mattered as much as formal rank. Being seen as honorable made it easier to lead. Public life was full of networks of patrons and clients, speeches and assemblies, and a constant attention to how actions would be judged by peers. In plain language, people cared who you were and whether you behaved like someone deserving of trust. This created a space where philosophical virtues such as consistency, self-control, and fairness could actually be political tools, because a leader perceived as steady could guide others without having to shout. For Marcus, philosophical power looked like practice as much as theory. His notes show someone reminding himself to act justly, to be patient with difficult colleagues, and to remember mortality when tempted by vanity. He treated virtue as something to cultivate daily, small exercises of restraint, honest speech, and humility in public. A modern parallel would be a leader who keeps a short private routine, journaling, reflecting, calling a mentor, before responding to angry emails. It's less dramatic than a grand speech but often more effective. A little humor helps, it's like choosing to take a deep breath and reread a message before hitting reply all. Practical lessons remain clear and useful today. Leading by moral example still carries weight. Employees, citizens, or team members mirror the standards they see demonstrated. Stoic emphasis on focusing on what you can influence is a handy remedy against overreach and burnout. Yet philosophy cannot replace institutions, rules, transparent procedures, and checks on power are necessary too. In short, philosophical power in Rome worked best when it supported practical governance rather than substituting for it, an approach that can guide anyone in charge, whether of a city, a company, or a household. And if nothing else, keeping a private notebook to grumble into is cheaper than a PR consultant. Daily routine of a Stoic emperor. Marcus Aurelius arranged his days around clear, practical habits drawn from Stoic teaching, combining public duty with private discipline. He kept a private set of notes, now known as the Meditations, where he recorded short reflections and reminders to himself about how to behave and what to value. Those notes show a pattern: begin with inner work, then move outward to tasks that require leadership, and return to quiet reflection at the end of the day. Mornings began with mental preparation rather than leisure. He practiced a habit Stoics call premeditatio malorum, which simply means imagining possible setbacks so you are not surprised by them. Thinking through annoyances ahead of time makes them easier to accept later. For a modern example, picture mentally rehearsing a tricky meeting or imagining your morning commute going wrong so you stay calm when it happens. Short, practical self-talk and a quick review of priorities came first. Leaders don't start with social media, and neither did he. Even an emperor benefited from a checklist, if only to avoid forgetting which meeting could ruin someone's afternoon. The middle of the day was for doing. Public audiences, legal decisions, military planning, and correspondence filled many hours, but his Stoic training kept him focused on what he could control, his choices, judgments, and efforts, while letting go of what he could not. Simple physical routines supported this: exercise to keep the body fit for duty, plain food to avoid indulgence, and periods of calm between engagements to steady the mind. Think of it like alternating intense work sprints with short, deliberate breaks. It prevents burnout and sharpens judgment. And yes, even emperors had to tolerate dull banquets and bad porridge. Resilience can begin with small, funny discomforts. Evenings were for review and inward accounting. He would write, sometimes briefly, assessing where he had acted well and where he could improve, an ancient form of journaling. This practice is easy to copy today. Spend 5 minutes noting one success and one lesson before bed. Stoic reflection is not a self-flagellation exercise, it's honest bookkeeping of the soul. It's the difference between blaming traffic for a bad mood and recognizing you can choose your reaction. A touch of humility went a long way, acknowledging errors privately, then returning to sleep without self-lashing. The whole routine shows how steady habits support good judgment more than inspiration alone. Small acts, early reflection, practicing readiness for trouble, focusing on controllable actions, and closing the day with a short review, sustain a life of purpose. Practical, repeatable, and sometimes amusing. Take a moment each morning to expect the worst and prepare to do your best, and you'll handle deadlines, bosses, and soggy breakfasts a little more like a calm ruler and less like someone yelling at their coffee maker. The Roman education that shaped Marcus. Marcus Aurelius grew up inside a system that prized clear speech, steady character, and a wide reading habit. He was taught by professional teachers who trained him in rhetoric, the art of speaking and writing persuasively, and by mentors who showed him how to live. One of his main rhetoric teachers was Fronto, a celebrated orator who pushed his students to polish letters and court speeches until every word sounded right. Another key influence was Junius Rusticus, who introduced him to Stoic ideas and to the writings of Epictetus, which later shaped much of the inward discipline Marcus practiced. Formal lessons mixed language, literature, and practical exercises. Boys from elite families spent hours copying good authors, translating between Latin and Greek, and reciting passages out loud. These activities were not just about poetry or grammar, they were training in thinking and remembering under pressure. Students also took part in declamations, mock legal or political speeches, where they argued fictional cases in front of peers. Think of it as debate club, but with higher stakes and far fewer snacks. Moral education ran alongside technical training and mattered as much as technique. Tutors aimed to form character through examples and repetition. Teachers pointed to role models, criticized pride, praised moderation, and insisted on self-control. A practical habit they encouraged was regular self-examination, noting one's faults, rehearsing better responses, and trying to act consistently. Marcus turned this inward habit into a private practice of writing reflections in Greek during military campaigns, using short, candid notes to remind himself of the lessons taught at home and school. Greek culture played a big part in those lessons. Elite Roman boys learned Greek language and philosophy because the best thinkers and writers were Greek. Reading them gave tools for making ethical choices. At the same time, Roman education emphasized duty and public service rather than private cleverness. Schools prepared students to speak before the Senate, manage disputes, and carry public responsibilities, skills that Marcus would later need when making decisions in public life. Practical drills and moral reminders worked together. A typical daily routine might include memorizing a passage, practicing a speech, discussing a moral problem, and reflecting quietly on one's own conduct. Simple exercises, like rehearsing a calm reply to an insult or imagining losing something valuable to test attachment, were recommended. These are exercises anyone can try. Pause before answering a harsh email, or think through how you'd cope if a small comfort disappeared. They're less lofty than they sound and very useful in real life. Humor crept into the process, too, because teachers used witty examples to make a point stick. A master might mock a boastful student to prove how ridiculous excessive pride looks, or tell a short joke to loosen tension before a hard lesson. Learning was serious, but not solemn all the time. The combination of careful speech training, steady moral coaching, and Greek philosophical practices made for a temperament that valued reason, duty, and inner calm, qualities that later appear throughout Marcus's private reflections and public actions. Nature, reason, and Roman cosmology. Marcus Aurelius turned Stoic ideas into a running commentary on how to live, scribbling thoughts meant to steady his mind and guide his actions. He treats nature as an ordered whole, not just a backdrop for human drama, and insists that reason is the tool we have to fit ourselves into that order. The Stoic word logos, which he uses a lot, can be explained simply as the rational pattern or common sense woven into everything. Think of it as the universe's instruction manual, sometimes brief, often practical, and occasionally missing a page. In his view, the good life is plain: use your reason, do your duty, and accept what you cannot change. Stoic cosmology paints the cosmos as one living thing where everything affects everything else, nothing stands completely alone. This idea pushes people to behave as members of a larger community rather than lone islands. If your neighbor struggles, you are not watching a distant play, you are in the audience and on stage at once. A clear practical example: when a colleague is rude, instead of flaring up, the Stoic response is to remember that their actions are part of causes you might not see: illness, stress, or a bad morning, so respond with reason and keep things productive. It's like fixing a leaky roof instead of screaming at the rain. Reason, for Marcus, is not just abstract thinking. It's a daily habit that shapes small choices. He urges attention to how we speak, to keeping promises, and to treating obligations as opportunities to practice virtue. Picture a packed subway. Someone steps on your shoe. You can escalate, stew, and lose your train of good mood, or you can notice your breath, think of the shared human scramble, and step past the irritation. That tiny course correction, choosing care over anger, is the practical exercise of logos in ordinary life. Romans mixed Stoic cosmology with a strong sense of public duty, and Marcus modeled that blend by treating his role as service to the whole. The cosmos being ordered and interlinked suggested a moral requirement: act for the common good. This is useful now as much as then. Communities rely on people who see beyond short-term gain. So when making a decision at work or at home, ask whether your choice adds to the whole or chips away at it. No cosmic calculator required. And remember, the universe may be vast and sometimes indifferent, but adopting reason and a sense of shared life makes daily troubles smaller and, oddly, more manageable. Ethics of duty in the imperial context. Marcus Aurelius wrote the notebooks we call the Meditations in Greek as private reflections, and those pages show how a ruler tried to turn Stoic ideas into everyday action. Stoicism puts duty at the heart of a good life: do your role well, act with reason, and care for the common good. Duty here isn't only following orders, it's a moral habit that says, first have responsibilities to others because we share a world. Think of it as a public-minded checklist you carry in your head. In the imperial setting that Marcus faced, duty had a sharp public edge. An emperor's choices affected thousands, even millions, so the Stoic rule to act according to nature and reason pushed toward fairness, steadiness, and service rather than spectacle. That meant giving weight to law, keeping promises, and resisting personal anger when making decisions about taxes, justice, or war. A simple example: a local official who notices embezzlement must act, not just for punishment's sake, but to preserve trust in institutions. The Stoic ruler values the integrity of the whole community. Duties can be mundane, like replying to petitions, or dramatic, like sending troops. Both are moral work. Practically, Marcus's ethics of duty relied on inner practices to support outer behavior. He used short exercises, reminding himself of what was within his control, imagining things going wrong so he wouldn't be surprised, and writing down maxims to keep his judgment steady. In plain terms, he trained himself to stay calm under pressure. Try a modern version. Before you step into a stressful meeting, take 30 seconds to list what you can change and what you can't. It's surprisingly effective. Also, journaling helps. Marcus did it in the field, and you can do it in a coffee shop without wearing a toga. This approach creates tensions, of course. Duty can become a cover for harshness if reason is ignored or misapplied. Stoicism asks leaders to temper strictness with mercy, to use authority for the common good rather than personal glory. So the ethical problem isn't having duties, it's deciding how to weigh competing duties, loyalty to family versus fairness to strangers, say. A useful rule of thumb is to ask whether your action preserves the community's trust. If it doesn't, rethink it. That doesn't always give an easy answer, but it focuses attention on consequences beyond self-interest. For people today who have responsibility, managers, teachers, parents, public servants, Marcus's view is practical and oddly modern. Define your role clearly, remind yourself daily why the role matters, and cultivate small habits that keep your judgment calm. When a report goes wrong or a child throws a tantrum, do the necessary thing first, explain the reason later, and learn from the outcome. Humor helps. Think of duty like fixing a leaky roof, unpleasant, necessary, and oddly satisfying when done right. In short, the imperial ethics of duty asks for steady character, clear thinking, and a readiness to serve the well-being of others, not just the grandeur of one's title. Public virtue and private reflection. Marcus Aurelius kept a private notebook where he wrote reminders to himself about how to behave while running an empire, and that private practice reveals the Stoic heart. Virtue is lived in public but trained in secret. He believed that the good of the community depended on individuals who acted steadily, honestly, and with self-control, not on applause. Meditations is the clearest record we have of that inward regimen, short, direct entries aimed at correcting habit and sharpening judgment. So the idea is simple: what you do inside shapes what you do outside. One basic Stoic tool is to separate what you can control from what you cannot, explained plainly so anyone can use it. If a decision maker focuses energy on things they can change, choices, effort, tone, rather than on the weather, gossip, or luck, their public choices improve. Picture a mayor who cannot stop a sudden storm ruining a parade, but who can organize relief calmly and transparently. The public sees steadiness, and the private calm that produced it was intentional training. Small acts of daily reflection. 10 minutes of writing down reactions after a rough meeting, for example, work like mental push-ups. Public virtue for Marcus meant duties like fairness, courage, self-discipline, and refusing petty gain when it would harm others. In practice, this looks like a judge checking bias before a verdict, a CEO being transparent about mistakes, or a teacher admitting when they were wrong about a grade. Those examples are mundane but powerful. Refusal of corrupt advantage, steady speech in crisis, and consistent kindness are public habits sourced in private restraint. The Stoic expectation is not theatrical heroism but ordinary reliability. It's less about grand gestures and more about the small, repeated choices that earn trust. Private reflection supplied the ballast. Marcus wrote to remind himself of humility and the limits of praise, and modern readers can adopt similar habits without ancient robes. Jotting a paragraph in the evening about what went well, what went wrong, and what one will try tomorrow turns experience into learning. Another straightforward technique is rehearsing setbacks quietly, thinking through a tough conversation ahead of time, so when it happens you're less surprised and more deliberate. It sounds austere, but it pays off. fewer reactive outbursts, clearer priorities, and less regret. And yes, keeping a private notebook is a low-tech life hack. It won't make you a philosopher overnight, but it will save you from acting like a character in a sitcom when stressed. The real power comes when private habits shape public character consistently. A leader who checks their temper in private and practices empathy in small moments will inspire confidence when decisions matter. Trust grows from predictable integrity, not from speeches. Consider a medical team where the chief routinely reviews errors with humility. That tone reduces blame and improves care. Stoic practice recognizes that inner work isn't selfish navel-gazing, it's preparation. Think of it as polishing the lens through which you act publicly. Cleaner lens, clearer actions. Practical steps: keep short notes, review them weekly, remind yourself of a few core principles, and practice one small restraint each day. These are simple, repeatable, and effective. A little humor helps, treating your conscience like a stubborn houseplant. Water it regularly or it'll make your living room awkward. In the end, Marcus's message is direct: cultivate an honest inner life so your outward life can actually do some good. War, plague, and Stoic resilience. Marcus Aurelius kept a running dialogue with himself in a book now called the Meditations, and those pages show how one man tried to apply Stoic ideas while leading an empire through both wars and a devastating epidemic. He was a Roman emperor who also trained his mind like a soldier trains his body, practicing exercises that helped him face danger, grief, and the slow collapse of what he could not control. The plague that swept the population and the long campaigns on the empire's frontiers tested leadership in practical ways: logistics, morale, caring for the sick, and choosing when to press an attack or when to pull back. That combination, commanding armies while hospitals filled, forced a philosophy out of theory and into harsh daylight. Stoic resilience, as Marcus practiced it, is less about stiff upper lips and more about clear judgment. Focus on what you control, accept what you cannot change. Short sentence. He breaks down events into two piles: those you can influence and those you cannot. In simple terms, if a supply line breaks, fix it. If a disease runs its course, treat people and mourn what must be mourned. Mental training aimed to reduce panic and wasted energy. A modern example: when a company-wide project derails, you change plans for the parts you can fix and stop yelling at the weather. That kind of clarity saves time and prevents needless suffering. He also practiced a version of negative visualization, thinking briefly about losing what you love so you're not surprised when loss comes, and used it to build emotional resilience. It sounds grim, but it's practical. Consider someone who imagines losing a job for a few minutes each week. They'll be more ready to find a new path if it happens and will value their present work more while they have it. During campaigns, Marcus reportedly reminded himself that soldiers, supplies, and health are all fragile, which made him more deliberate when sending men into danger and more humane when dealing with the sick. Humor helps here. It's like checking your umbrella before a storm and then smiling when it finally rains. Duty and cosmopolitan compassion balanced each other in his thinking. Rome's wars required firm measures; Stoicism required seeing enemies as humans shaped by circumstances. This didn't make him soft in command, but it did limit cruelty as policy. Practical decisions followed from that: rationing medicine fairly, writing firm but reasonable orders, and staying awake at night worrying about the civilian costs of military action. For everyday people, that translates into treating competitors at work with fairness while still defending your project. You can be principled without being needlessly brutal. Stoic techniques are simple enough to use now, even if you're not emperor. Start with a breath, ask what's in your control, and schedule a small mental rehearsal for likely setbacks. Short exercises. For example, when a family member gets sick, plan meals, arrange help, and let go of plans that depend on them being well. You'll be calmer and more useful. During public health crises, the Stoic habit of community-focused action, helping neighbors, following clear rules, staying informed without doom-scrolling, keeps systems working. And a little humor lightens tension. Marcus knew that resilience doesn't mean being joyless. Bad things happen. You can be firm, kind, and oddly pragmatic about it. The language of self-examination. Marcus Aurelius wrote private notes that later became known for their steady focus on self-examination, and those notes show a clear method: name what you think and feel, test it against reason, then act. He treated the mind like a small workshop where impressions arrive and must be inspected before being turned into action. In plain terms, instead of letting the first flash of anger or pride run the show, stop and ask what that feeling is really about. Think of it as checking the oil before you start the engine. At the center of this practice is the habit of catching your impressions, the quick thoughts that pop into your head, and asking whether they are true, useful, or under your control. An impression might be the thought "they ignored me," which can blow up into resentment. Pause. Ask, is it a fact, an interpretation, or a guess? If it's only an interpretation, you don't have to treat it like a law. This is simple and practical. For example, when a colleague misses a deadline, instead of assuming malice, note the thought, take a breath, and check the evidence. Maybe they're overwhelmed or made an honest mistake. A daily routine makes this less gloomy and more workable. Marcus's own notes resemble a nightly check-in, short entries that name errors, remind of values, and set intentions. Try a 2-minute end-of-day review. Jot what went well, where you stumbled, and one small change for tomorrow. Keep it brief. One sentence can be enough. This is not confession for punishment but a light audit. Many people report that writing one line like "first lost my temper, next time first will pause" makes tomorrow easier, because the mind already has a plan. Practical tools break the habit of automatic reaction. Use a quick rule like count to 3 before responding to an upsetting message, or say to yourself, "Is this in my control?" If it isn't, let it go. If it is, decide the next useful step. Another useful technique is the view from above, a mental zoom out that reminds you how small one insult or frustration is in the larger scheme of your life. It's not cosmic sternness. Think of it as a gentle perspective shift that reduces the loudness of petty hurts. Try it when a minor gripe feels huge. Picture the scene like a movie and you become less caught up in the drama. Make self-examination conversational and mildly amusing so it sticks. You can give your inner critic a name and let it be flawed, or imagine your future self giving advice like a calm, slightly sarcastic coach. Humor helps because it reduces shame and keeps the practice compassionate. A modern example: when tempted to send a snarky email, tell your inner coach, do first want to be right or do first want this resolved, and then choose the calmer route. Finally, remember that this language of self-examination is a skill, not a flaw detector. It trains attention, steadies judgment, and nudges behavior toward what you value. Start small. Stop before you speak. Ask 2 simple questions: what I'm first feeling, and is this useful? Keep notes, practice brief reflections, and treat setbacks as experiments, not failures. With consistent, gentle inspection, ordinary days become opportunities for clearer thinking and kinder action. Friendship and leadership in Rome. Marcus Aurelius kept a personal journal that reads like a leader taking notes to himself, and in it he returns often to the same idea: friends are mirrors that show you who you are. Stoicism, the school of thought he followed, teaches that we should focus on what we can control, our choices, our reactions, our effort, and let go of what we cannot. This simple stance shapes how he thought leaders should treat friends, with honesty, patience, and the willingness to correct gently rather than flatter. He names teachers and companions, like Junius Rusticus and his old tutor Frento, as examples of people who helped shape his judgment and character. A clear lesson is that true friendship for a leader is practical and moral at once. Be open, but not reckless. Offer praise when it is due, and correction when it is needed. In everyday terms, a manager who praises a team member's good work but also gives constructive feedback helps that person grow. Short meetings without sugarcoating are better than long conversations full of empty compliments. Marcus advised keeping close companions who will tell you hard truths. They act like a personal quality control team for your character. Romans mixed friendliness with formal ties like patronage, which meant favors and obligations flowed both ways. That system shows a point still useful today. Relationships between leaders and followers often include expectations, and making those clear prevents resentment. Leaders should practice reciprocity, give useful support, ask for loyalty in return, and be ready to step up when friends need help. An example from modern life: a department head who defends a junior employee from unfair criticism builds loyalty, but must also ensure the employee meets standards, or the protection becomes harmful. Practical habits matter more than lofty talk. Listen first. Speak less. Admit mistakes out loud. These small acts create trust faster than grand speeches. Humor helps, too. A light joke after a blunt correction softens the blow and reminds everyone that you're human. But don't confuse friendliness with weakness. Boundaries make friendship sustainable in leadership because they protect fairness and credibility. If you avoid setting limits to keep everyone happy, you'll lose respect faster than you think. Finally, cultivate friends who help you become a better leader, not just agree with you. Encourage debate around decisions, reward honesty, and treat kindness and competence as twin virtues. In practice, that could mean inviting a colleague to challenge your plan and genuinely considering their input, or swapping roles occasionally to understand someone else's pressures. Marcus's approach was simple: use friendship to sharpen virtue, and use leadership to serve the common good. It sounds noble, and it works, even if you sometimes have to remind your friends to stop stealing your office snacks. Marcus Aurelius and the Roman legal mind. The Roman legal world was less a collection of dusty rules and more a habit of careful thinking, and Marcus Aurelius brought that habit into both his private reflections and public choices. He kept a steady focus on justice as a personal practice. His notebooks show repeated reminders to act fairly, to judge clearly, and to treat people according to reason rather than impulse. Stoic training taught him to see law not only as an external set of commands but as a reflection of right reason. That idea shaped how he weighed disputes and how his circle of advisors framed legal questions for him. At the center of Roman governance stood magistrates, courts, and trained jurists who argued cases and wrote opinions. An emperor could set tone and priorities without doing every legal task himself. Marcus relied on that apparatus while insisting that decisions be guided by moral clarity. Picture a modern CEO who reads every HR file and still asks the unbiased lawyer for a second opinion. Marcus was similar, combining hands-on concern with respect for legal expertise. He prized calm logic over ranting, and he expected his subordinates to apply rules consistently, yet he also pushed for mercy when strict application would cause needless harm. Stoic ideas like natural law fitted neatly into the Roman legal mind because both claimed there were universal reasons for fairness. In plain terms, natural law meant that some rights and duties follow from our shared humanity. Everyone with a mind should be treated according to what reason requires. That's why Marcus's moral notes often return to the theme of treating strangers and citizens alike with respect. Think of it like neighborhood rules: you wouldn't steal a bike from a friend or a stranger, because both acts break the basic rule that keeps the community functioning. A little humor helps. Even a grumpy neighbor understands that taking someone's parking space without apology will get you noticed fast. For practical use today, the lessons are clear and surprisingly modern. Legal systems work best when leaders combine clear rules with moral judgment, when advisors are listened to, and when laws are aimed at preserving common life rather than showcasing power. Marcus's blend of philosophical self-discipline and reliance on legal professionals models a balance any manager, judge, or public official could use. Short reflection, then action. Science, medicine, and practical philosophy. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher who kept private notebooks known as the Meditations, using them to practice clear thinking and steady action. He saw reason as a tool for living well, and that attitude shaped how many Romans approached medicine and practical knowledge. Roman thought blended hands-on engineering, common-sense observations of the body, and moral training. It wasn't abstract for the sake of being clever, but aimed at solving everyday problems. This practical bent meant that medical care, public works, and ethical training often overlapped in ordinary life. Physicians in Rome drew on a long Greek tradition, and medical practice relied on careful observation of symptoms, remedies that people actually used, and a strong dose of common sense. Surgeons worked on battle wounds and could set bones or stitch cuts, while other healers recommended rest, diet changes, and herbal poultices for aches and fevers. Public amenities like aqueducts and public baths helped reduce the spread of disease by improving hygiene, and that kind of engineering was as much a public health measure as it was civic pride. In daily terms, it's like preferring a clean kitchen and sensible meals over wild experiments. Prevention beats panic. Stoic practical philosophy fit neatly with these medical habits because it emphasized discipline, self-control, and focusing on what you can change. When someone fell ill, the Stoic response was not to surrender to fear or false hopes, but to follow the doctor's advice, adjust one's behavior, and keep the mind steady. Marcus Aurelius' journal entries read like mental drills: remind yourself what you can do, accept what you can't, and act where you must. That's useful advice for someone taking a difficult medication schedule or dealing with chronic pain. Stay punctual with treatment, don't catastrophize, and live by routine. A little grim acceptance mixed with action tends to work better than dramatic Googling at 3 in the morning. Stoicism trades frantic searches for calm, methodical steps. Doctors and philosophers in that world shared habits, close observation, careful record-keeping, and an ethics that favored duty and temperance. A physician's bedside manner benefited from Stoic restraint, calm speech, steady hands, and realistic counsel, while the philosopher benefited from basic bodily care so the mind could do its work. People used simple lifestyle changes as therapy: better sleep, avoiding overindulgence, and regular exercise. Think of it as a prescription that combines common sense with moral reminders: take your medicine, rest, and try not to make every sniffle a drama worthy of the theater. Everyday examples show how these strands meet today. A person recovering from surgery who follows rehabilitation exercises, keeps a steady schedule, and practices short journal reflections is doing modern medicine and Stoic training at once. A doctor who listens patiently, prescribes reasonable steps, and encourages small, steady improvements is practicing the same practical philosophy that prized usefulness over showy talk. And for a touch of humor, Marcus Aurelius might not have enjoyed waiting rooms, but he probably would have admired someone who used the time to write a useful note instead of composing an angry tweet. Architecture of thought, Roman metaphors. Marcus Aurelius turned practical images from Roman life into ways of thinking, using streets, walls, and public spaces as mirrors for the mind. He wrote private notes that lean on everyday objects to explain inner work, so his reflections often feel like instructions from an architect rather than a professor. The city he lived in, the bustle of forums, the rhythm of baths and roads, gave him ready-made metaphors for how to arrange thoughts and actions. Foundations are a favorite image. Basic principles act like the bedrock under a building. If your trustworthiness or sense of duty is shaky, the whole structure tips. Think of waking up and doing one small honest thing before checking your phone. That one action is a tidy stone in your foundation. Columns and pillars stand for virtues: courage, restraint, justice. Each one helps hold up the roof of a good life. You would not use a cardboard column for a real roof, and you should not trade patience for a quick win. Walls and gates describe limits and choices. A gate can be open for friends and firm against nonsense. Practical example: set a simple rule to not answer work emails after dinner. Your gate is closed for the evening. The metaphor of an inner citadel comes up as a way to cultivate a private place that external chaos cannot easily breach. It is not about fortifying yourself into loneliness, but about keeping a core of calm and reason. A modern example: when a social feed floods you, imagine drawing a curtain across the window rather than smashing it. Maintenance is another key point. Buildings need repair, and so do habits. Small daily tasks, sleep, a short journal, a quick walk, are like pointing up cracks and replastering. It sounds mundane. Yet consistency is the master mason. Public architecture maps cleanly to social life. The forum equals our public roles, meetings, debates, parenting conversations. The inner chamber equals solitude and reflection. You can wear a public robe in the forum and take it off in your private room. Try keeping 1 hour a week without screens to practice being in your inner chamber. Community functions as buttresses. Friends and mentors support your structure when storms come. Don't neglect them. They are cheaper and more effective than emergency scaffolding. Seeing thoughts as rooms and cities gives you a toolkit for action, not just pretty language. Lay a solid foundation with simple principles, raise pillars of habit, close gates where needed, and invite allies to shore up weaknesses. Then when life shakes the scaffolding, you have a plan that looks less like chaos and more like careful design. Short sentence, build well. Comparative Stoicism, Greek roots, Roman branches. Stoicism began in the Greek-speaking world as a school of thought that put virtue, good character and wise action, at the center of a well-lived life. Its teachers argued that some things depend on us, like our choices and judgments, while many things do not, such as wealth, reputation, or the weather, recognizing that difference is a practical foundation. Think of a sudden traffic jam. You cannot control other drivers, but you can control your breathing and whether you honk like a maniac. That basic distinction underpins almost everything both Greek and Roman Stoics would teach. Greek Stoicism laid out the theoretical map. Philosophers focused on ethics, logic, and an ordered picture of nature, using reason to examine human life and the cosmos. They developed ideas about living according to nature and cultivating inner consistency, and they spent time clarifying terms and debating principles so the system would hold together. In practice, this looked like careful argument, mental exercises, and a habit of examining beliefs. A student might rehearse how to stay calm in a difficult conversation, testing each thought for soundness. The Greeks supplied the language and the architecture of the philosophy, building a framework that aimed at clarity and coherence. Romans took that architecture and furnished it for everyday use. Adapting Stoicism to a culture of law, administration, and family duty, Roman thinkers turned abstract teachings into tools for public life, how to act responsibly as a leader, a parent, or an official. Figures like Marcus Aurelius show how Stoic practice works in high-pressure roles, private reflection combined with a constant concern for duty. He kept a personal journal of reminders and exercises to steady his mind amid obligations. Readers today can picture a busy person writing short notes to themselves between meetings, not because philosophy is a hobby, but because it helps one keep calm and do the right thing. The Roman branch emphasized practicality and character in social roles rather than metaphysical puzzles. Comparing the two strains helps make Stoicism useful for modern life. Use the Greek side when you want a clear map of why certain things matter, understand categories, test your beliefs, learn basic distinctions. Use the Roman side when you need application, practice a morning journal, try imagining small losses so you're less surprised by them, treat daily chores as training in patience. A concrete example: if a manager faces criticism at work, the Greek approach asks what judgments are true about the criticism, the Roman approach asks what duty the manager has now and how to act with integrity. Both matter. And yes, you can be philosophically rigorous and still laugh at your own coffee spill. Stoicism did not demand turning into a statue. Philosophical counseling in the imperial court. At the imperial palace, Marcus Aurelius kept Stoic advisors close by to help him think straight and act justly when politics got messy. One trusted name was Junius Rusticus, who taught him Stoic ideas and gave him the writings of Epictetus to study. Another influence came from his rhetorical teacher Fronto, who pushed him to speak clearly even when the heart rattled. Counsel came in conversation, in letters, and in short lessons meant to be used, not just admired. Marcus's private notes, the Meditations, read like the output of a counselor's office where the client is also the chief executive. They show how philosophical advice was turned into daily practice. Those counselors used simple tools rather than abstract lectures. They taught the dichotomy of control, which is just a fancy way to say, focus on what you can change, and stop fretting over what you can't. For example, if a provincial governor sent bad news about grain shortages, the emperor's immediate steps would be to gather facts and order relief where possible. That's control, while accepting that weather or foreign raids might be out of reach. Short exercises help too. Write down what might go wrong before it happens so it won't surprise you. Remind yourself of your role and responsibilities in a few clear sentences, and rehearse calm responses to insults. These are like modern breathing techniques or checklists for leaders, but with moral aims built in. Counseling in that court mixed moral teaching with practical action. Advisors did not simply tell the emperor to be virtuous and vanish, they suggested policies, ways to speak to adversaries, and how to handle grief when a general fell in battle. A simple, everyday example: when anger rose after an insult in the Senate, a Stoic counselor might advise pausing, picturing the offender's faults without hatred, and answering simply, not to lose esteem or make the situation worse. Humor helped diffuse tension too. Jokes about human foibles were tools to lower pride, not to mock. In other words, philosophy functioned as both mirror and map. It showed inner truth and pointed to next steps. Today's managers and counselors can borrow from that model easily. Keep a short journal at night to review decisions, like Marcus did. Use the what first control filter before reacting to bad press or a failed product launch. Invite a trusted advisor to challenge your assumptions, preferably someone who will not flatter you at every turn. And yes, it's permissible to laugh at your own errors afterward. It's healthier and historically grounded. The core idea remains simple: good judgment improves with guided reflection, honest friends, and small daily practices that train the mind to be steady when everything else is shaking. The markets, the masses, and moral sentiments. Marcus Aurelius wrote private reflections now known as the Meditations, and he lived his life trying to match action to idea. He practiced Stoicism, a simple school of thought that teaches control over what you can control, mostly your own judgments and choices, and acceptance of what you cannot. In plain terms, Stoicism asks you to steady your reactions when a market price rises or a shouting crowd jostles you, to judge fairly when tempted by profit, and to act with the common good in mind rather than mere self-interest. Think of it like training a calm mind for messy public life: breathe, check your judgment, then act. Roman marketplaces were not just places to trade wheat and cloth, they were centers of social life where citizens met, argued, and learned norms. The same spot that saw bargains being struck also shaped how people treated one another. Honesty in weights and measures, decency in speech, and fairness in exchange mattered because trust kept transactions flowing. Marcus warned, in effect, against letting luxury or greed warp judgment. Storekeepers and shoppers alike benefit when fairness is the rule. In everyday terms, that means paying a fair price to the small vendor down the street rather than squeezing them for an extra cent. It means being the customer who leaves the cashier a kind word instead of a scolding that lingers longer than the queue. Crowds amplify emotions, and Marcus recognized that citizens form a kind of moral community where feelings about right and wrong spread fast. Moral sentiments are simply the gut responses and cultivated habits that tell you whether something feels just or unjust, like the discomfort you feel seeing someone cheated in a market, or the warming satisfaction when a stranger covers your dropped groceries. Stoicism encourages tempering those raw instincts with reason. Pity becomes practical help, indignation becomes corrective speech, and outrage doesn't become a mob. Picture a packed subway or an overflowing checkout lane. Patience, a small apology, or a helping hand can shift the tone of the whole group more reliably than a loud complaint. Practical steps grounded in Marcus's approach are straightforward. Pause before reacting to a rude seller or a scammy anno domini. Ask whether your response protects the common good and your own inner calm. Cultivate small habits: honesty in small purchases, gratitude for good service, refusing to join online pile-ons, and they will scale into public trust. Businesses and individuals who choose fairness build reputations faster than those chasing short-term gain. And when you fail, as everyone does, the Stoic trick is to treat mistakes as lessons, not disasters. A little humor helps. Don't rage review a bakery because the croissant was warm but not flaky. Write a constructive note and buy the good one next time. In the crowded markets of life, Marcus's practical ethics point toward steadiness, responsibility, and a kindness that keeps both markets and masses functioning well. Rituals, religion, and Stoic compatibility. Marcus Aurelius balanced the burdens of leadership with a steady practice of Stoic thinking, and he also fulfilled the public religious duties expected of Rome's chief magistrate. As a ruler, he led sacrifices, presided over ceremonies, and upheld the traditional practices that knit Roman civic life together. At the same time, his private writings show a man who used reflection, self-examination, and short moral reminders to shape his inner life. In other words, outward rites and inward discipline lived side by side rather than in separate worlds. Roman rituals were less about private belief and more about shared life, making offerings, observing omens, swearing vows, and showing pietas, duty toward family, gods, and state. Stoicism values duty too, though it frames duty as acting in accordance with reason and virtue. That overlap made ritual participation practical for a Stoic leader. Carrying out a public sacrifice could be seen as fulfilling social obligations, calming the populace, and modeling steadiness, tasks Marcus surely found useful even if the gods were understood through the Stoic idea of a rational order rather than as capricious characters. Think of it like attending a company holiday party. You might not adore the punch, but showing up keeps the team together. Stoic theology speaks in simple terms. There is a rational principle that shapes the world, often called logos, and people are part of that order. This idea can be made compatible with the polytheistic show of Roman religion by treating gods as symbolic expressions of aspects of that rational order or as civic figures that encourage social cohesion. Not all Stoics worshipped in the same way. Some used traditional rites as moral training, others treated them as useful customs. Marcus's stance seems practical. He honored the ceremonies and used private reflection to keep his judgments clear. A quick modern comparison: you might light a candle at a family gathering because it comforts relatives, while privately holding your own moral compass. Both acts can coexist. Rituals also serve as habit drills, something Stoics appreciate. Regular ceremonies create predictable frames for behavior, just as Stoic practices like morning reflection and evening review create mental habits. Saying thanks before a meal, standing up for a collective moment, or observing a civic rite trains attention and steadiness. Marcus's habit of writing short, pointed reminders to himself fits this pattern. Small repeated acts build character. And yes, ancient incense probably helped mask the smell of a crowded forum, which is a fine practical benefit and also a little comic. Little comforts matter when you're trying to stay composed. Tensions do remain, especially when rites demand outward show without inner virtue. Stoicism famously prioritizes inner goodness over mere appearance. So a Stoic can participate in a public ritual out of respect and duty, while still insisting that true piety is shown in how one treats people. In daily life, that looks like keeping family traditions because they bind you to others, but not pretending those outward acts replace honest behavior, donating time to help, not just posing for the photograph. Marcus's model suggests rituals should be used to support virtue, not to hide its absence. For practical people today, the lesson is clear and useful. You can honor community practices, weddings, memorials, national observances, without needing to accept every supernatural claim, and you can use routines as scaffolding for ethical behavior. A short daily reflection, a family meal with gratitude, a public act that reaffirms shared values. Ritual becomes a tool for discipline and connection rather than a contradiction to inner belief. And if you ever worry that your ancestors were too fond of togas, remember that patience with wrinkled fabric is a Stoic virtue in itself. Memory, time, and the historiography of Rome. During his private reflections, Marcus Aurelius treated memory as a tool for moral practice rather than a mere storehouse of facts. He wrote down lessons for himself, turning recollection into a kind of daily exercise. This is visible in the Meditations, which reads like a notebook where memory is used to bring ethical truths into the present moment. Think of it like keeping a personal list of reminders: forgive, act with justice, remember the fleeting nature of fame. Short note-taking. Useful. Public memory in Rome worked differently and often loudly. Emperors and elites commissioned monuments, coins, and inscriptions to shape how events would be remembered by the many. A coin with an emperor's profile was a small but powerful pamphlet. A triumphal arch told a story in stone. These were not neutral records, they were designed to persuade. Historians, Livy, Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, then entered the scene with their own versions, and those versions sometimes agreed and sometimes clashed. Tacitus could be hard on power and suspicious of official spin. Suetonius liked gossip and character sketches that made emperors into personalities you could both laugh at and loathe. The result is a layered memory. Official bragging sits beside critical narrative and scandalous anecdote. Time in Stoic thought, which Marcus practiced, has a clear bend toward the present as the moment of action. The past is useful for lessons, and the future is beyond control. Marcus turned historical examples into prompts, learn from what happened, but don't be chained to regret or fantasy. This practical handling of time helped him live in a way that kept his duties aligned with his principles. In everyday terms, it's like cleaning out your inbox: archive what's useful, delete what's harmful, and deal with what's in front of you now. Simple. Effective. Historiography of Rome shows that memory and time are not neutral. Choices about what to record, emphasize, or omit create the story future people will read. Different historians selected different themes: virtue and decline, moral lessons, political analysis, so their accounts shape collective memory in distinct directions. For example, the same emperor can appear as a monster in one account and a bungling human in another, depending on what the historian cared about. That's the historian's power and peril: selection equals shaping. Much like family stories that grow taller with each retelling, ancient narratives reflect the teller. Practical lessons jump out for us today. Keep a short journal if you want to think more clearly. Marcus's habit of writing for himself is a low-tech tool that still works. Be aware that public narratives, whether on social media or in newspapers, mix promotion, critique, and rumor. Treat them like curated photo albums, not full biographies. Finally, use historical awareness as a check against simple hero or villain stories. Memory and time can be nudged by motives and convenience. In short, remember deliberately, act in the present, and read historical claims with a small, amused skepticism. Material wealth, power, and inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius combined the responsibilities of supreme power with the quiet habits of a Stoic thinker, and his notes show how someone at the top can still pursue inner freedom. He treated wealth and authority as tools to be used well, not trophies to feed the ego. That distinction is simple: things outside your control, money, rank, praise, are not where true freedom lives. You can own a palace and still be a prisoner of your desires. He often reminds readers to keep externals in perspective. Wealth is useful, but it can also be distracting. Power can solve problems, but it can also create anxieties about image and legacy. Think of a modern CEO who has a big office but wakes up worrying about every email. Practical moves help: limit what you carry mentally, practice saying enough, and check whether choices come from want or need. A short daily habit: writing down one thing you don't need to chase today, works better than a long speech to yourself. Power tends to shape identity if you let it. Marcus advised returning mentally to the idea that everyone shares the same human condition, which keeps pride in check. A simple example is useful: when a manager remembers they're a person who makes mistakes, they're more likely to listen and learn. Try small exercises: when you receive praise, thank the giver and then return to the task. When you gain an advantage, use it to help someone else. Little acts of service cut the threads that tie self-worth to status. It's not glamorous, but it's effective. Inner freedom shows up as the ability to choose your response. Marcus taught techniques like reflecting on worst-case scenarios, not to make you gloomy, but to make you ready. Picture losing something expensive. The pre-check makes the loss less devastating and the remaining items more appreciated. Humor helps here. Imagine pretending your smartphone is a stone and noticing you survive the whole day. That tiny mental trick loosens attachment. In daily life, the Stoic approach is practical: tend to responsibilities, enjoy comforts, and keep reminding yourself that freedom is an internal habit you can practice every morning. Everyday Stoicism, practical exercises for modern readers. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal of thoughts and reminders meant to steer his actions toward calm, clarity, and moral purpose, and many of those same ideas can be turned into short, doable practices for modern life. Start with a simple fact: Stoicism cares most about what you can control, your judgments, your actions, and your attitude, and less about what you cannot, like other people's moods or the weather. This basic distinction is the backbone of every exercise below, and it works whether you're dealing with a cranky boss or a slow Wi-Fi signal. Begin each morning with a 2-minute planning ritual. Write down one thing within your control that you will do well today, something concrete like reply to emails calmly or walk for 20 minutes without doom scrolling. Then list one likely irritation and how you'll respond, using short, scripted language. If the train is delayed, first we'll breathe, read one paragraph, and accept the change. Practically speaking, this makes stress less of a surprise. Think of it as rehearsing for a small, inevitable catastrophe like spilled coffee. You practice wiping it up instead of catastrophizing. During the day, practice a pause before you react. When someone snaps at you, take a breath and ask 2 quick questions. Is this within my control? What is a useful next action? Labeling helps. Name the feeling, annoyed, wounded, out loud or in your head, and you've already reduced its grip. Try a short, visual trick. Imagine the comment as a pebble thrown into a pond and watch the ripples settle. It sounds a bit theatrical, and that's okay. Humor can break tension. Real-life example: a colleague takes credit for your idea. Pause, note that you can't control them, plan your calm reply, and follow up later by documenting your contribution. Use a brief negative visualization exercise once a week to build gratitude and resilience. Spend 5 minutes picturing losing small comforts: no coffee machine, your favorite route closed, a cancelled plan. Not to be morbid, but to sharpen appreciation. Afterward, list 3 things you feel grateful for. It's like a tiny vaccine against shock. Exposure in small doses makes the real thing less overwhelming. For instance, anticipating a missed flight helps you think, okay, if this happens, first I'll call, rebook, and enjoy a coffee, which turns panic into problem solving. End each day with a fast evening review. Jot down 1 thing you did well and 1 place you reacted on autopilot. Be specific, not first was patient, but first waited 3 breaths before answering an email. Make correction simple. Pick 1 tiny change for tomorrow. Add 1 more practice: voluntary discomfort. Skip dessert once in a while or take a brisk walk in the cold. This trains you to tolerate small discomforts so bigger ones feel less chaotic. These exercises are not magic, but they are practical tools. Use them consistently and life feels clearer, and you might even smile when life throws a pebble into the pond. Iconography and the image of the philosopher emperor. Sculptures, coins, and public reliefs were the ways Romans painted a ruler's reputation for everyone to see. Artists and officials chose poses, clothing and expressions deliberately. A raised hand meant calm command, a cloak could suggest learning, and a beard hinted at a philosophical taste rather than just facial hair. Small objects like coins were especially powerful because they reached common people across the empire. A tiny face on a coin could shape how thousands pictured their leader at breakfast, in the market, or while pretending to listen to a senator. The image of Marcus Aurelius blends 2 lines of meaning that usually sit awkwardly together: the warrior and the thinker. Portraits often show him with the beard associated with Greek philosophers such as Socrates, a visual shorthand that says first read and reflect. At the same time, many public monuments and statues emphasize authority, a steady gaze, the posture of someone who gives orders, so the viewer receives both messages at once: strength guided by wisdom. Think of it like a modern leader photographed at a charity event while wearing a blazer. The picture tells you they're competent and kind, even if they prefer spreadsheets to small talk. Public monuments tell more complicated stories. Large reliefs carved into columns and arches show scenes of campaigns or ceremonial acts, and the ruler often appears among them as both commander and moral exemplar. A famous equestrian statue presents the emperor on horseback, hand raised in a gesture that calls attention to magnanimity and control rather than boasting. This is image-making with a purpose. It reassures people that the same person who makes hard decisions also thinks about duty and the good of the community. In everyday terms, it's like a manager who wears a headset on the factory floor and then goes home to read philosophy. People notice both sides. Artists and propagandists were aware that realism helped credibility. Rather than smoothing every wrinkle into an idealized face, some portraits keep signs of age and thoughtfulness: furrowed brow, heavy features, so the emperor looks like someone who actually worries and reflects. That realism makes the philosopher emperor seem approachable in a strange way. He is no untouchable statue, but a seasoned person with cares. Today we do something similar with documentary-style photos of leaders at work. A candid shot can create trust more than a polished studio portrait. And yes, a little irony usually helped. Presenting a powerful ruler as a humble thinker was a neat PR trick, sort of the ancient equivalent of posting a selfie with a caption about mindfulness. Skepticism and critique from contemporary Romans. Marcus Aurelius's own notebook, The Meditations, shows he was well aware that many people around him doubted the reach and usefulness of Stoic ideas. Stoicism taught that virtue and rational self-control mattered more than wealth, praise, or comfort, and that inner calm could be cultivated even amid chaos. Some contemporaries accepted that in private life, others, especially those whose power depended on ceremony, persuasion, or showing off, treated such claims with suspicion. They wondered whether a ruler who preached indifference to externals could still lead armies, hold the Senate together, or reward loyal allies when politics needed favors and flair. Practical objections were common. A merchant focused on profit found the Stoic ideal of indifference to possessions odd, since profit keeps a shop open and a family fed. Senators and public speakers, whose careers thrived on charisma and appearances, argued that rhetoric and tradition mattered in ways philosophy could not replace. Soldiers sometimes mocked the idea of accepting fate serenely. In the mud of a campaign, a tidy theory about accepting loss can sound like a polite suggestion rather than a survival plan. These critiques forced Marcus and other Stoics to explain how inner discipline could coexist with the messy demands of public duty. Moral and religious worries also surfaced. Some Romans charged that Stoicism's emphasis on reason and nature could undercut the old gods and popular rites that knit communities together. That worry had teeth. Public religion in Rome reinforced social bonds and political legitimacy, and any philosophy that appeared to sideline communal worship made city elders uneasy. Critics went further and warned that Stoic calm might be used as a cover for hard-hearted behavior. If a leader claims to be unmoved by emotion, could that become an excuse for cruelty? This concern pushed Stoics to stress compassion alongside firmness, and Marcus's reflections often balanced sternness with real human feeling. Today's practical takeaway from those ancient critiques is surprisingly modern. People will test philosophical claims against lived demands. If a leader or friend preaches emotional control but avoids responsibility when a problem gets messy, skepticism is natural. Simple examples help. Praising not caring about money while always asking the treasury for favors looks inconsistent. Or telling soldiers to accept danger with a smile but denying them proper equipment invites doubt. The Romans' questions remind us to match ideals with action, and to acknowledge emotion when it matters. A dash of humor helps too. Calmness is useful, but it won't mend a broken Roman aqueduct, and Stoicism without practical care can sound like advice from someone who's forgotten to feed the dog. Marcus Aurelius in popular science and media. Modern writers, podcasters, and self-help speakers frequently turn to Marcus Aurelius's Meditations as a source of down-to-earth advice on dealing with stress, leadership, and daily disappointments. The original text survives in many translations and audiobooks, and popular authors like Ryan Holiday have built entire books and a podcast around applying those short reflections to modern life. Film and television also borrow his image. The movie Gladiator includes Marcus Aurelius as a character, played by Richard Harris, and documentaries about Rome or leadership sometimes use his quotations to illustrate a point about duty or calm decision-making. Therapists and psychology writers often point out real links between Stoic exercises and modern cognitive behavioral therapy. In plain terms, both Stoicism and CBT teach you to notice unhelpful thoughts and then change how you act in response. Practically, that looks like keeping a short journal to challenge panicky thinking, or rehearsing how you would handle a setback so it feels less overwhelming when it happens. Donald Robertson is an example of a modern writer who explains these connections clearly for non-experts, showing how a few Stoic techniques can help with anxiety or procrastination without turning you into a stone statue. Social media has made Marcus Aurelius into a steady supply of short, shareable lines that pair well with sunrise photos and gym selfies. Some of those quotes are helpful, and some are oversimplified. Subreddits, Instagram accounts, and daily email services post single-line Stoic quotes that people use as quick reminders: breathe, control what you can, let go of what you cannot. Apps and podcasts offer guided Stoic meditations that walk listeners through practical exercises: 1 minute on accepting a delay, 3 minutes on setting intentions, useful when you're stuck in traffic or waiting for a slow barista. At the same time, popular science and media sometimes flatten Stoicism into the idea that you should feel nothing. Scholars and practitioners push back, noting that Marcus's writings are full of self-reflection, emotion, and moral concern. The point is to manage reactions, not to suppress feelings. A helpful everyday example: if your morning coffee spills, Stoic practice suggests accepting the spill, cleaning up, and moving on rather than letting a ruined commute ruin your entire day. That keeps things practical, and it's also less exhausting than pretending to be a marble statue. Plus, you can still grumble quietly to yourself. Practical takeaways from the way media treats Marcus Aurelius include two things. First, pick small, repeatable habits: morning journaling, 5-minute reflection before bed, or a quick mental rehearsal of a stressful conversation, and practice them like a muscle. Second, be skeptical of one-liners that promise instant wisdom. Context matters, and Marcus's advice works best when treated as a set of tools, not a prescription to ignore feelings or ethical concerns. A little humor helps. Stoicism can make you steadier, but it won't make your boss stop emailing after hours. Legacy in European intellectual history. Many European scholars treated Marcus Aurelius not simply as an emperor but as a practical guide to inner discipline and moral judgment, and his meditations circulated as a private manual for living well. Stoicism, the school of thought he followed, teaches that people should focus on what they can control and accept what they cannot. In plain terms, that means worrying less about traffic and more about how you react to it. This simple message made his writings useful not only to philosophers reading abstract arguments but also to jurists, clerics, and civic leaders looking for a stable base of ethics. The clear, self-directed language of his diary-like notes helped bridge the gap between lofty theory and everyday practice. Across European intellectual circles, his ideas fed into the broader conversation about natural law, which is the belief that certain moral rules are rooted in human nature and common to all people. Put another way, natural law is the thought that there are some rights and wrongs you don't need a law professor to understand. Thinkers who shaped ideas about justice and governance often borrowed the Stoic sense of an ordered universe and a duty to live reasonably within it. That influence shows up in debates about what rulers owe their subjects, and about whether moral duties rest on feeling or on reason. In debates, Marcus's emphasis on duty, restraint, and service provided a moral tone that steered conversations towards self-control and the responsibilities of public life. Renaissance and later humanist scholars revived interest in classical texts, and Marcus was part of that revival. His practical tone made him appealing to writers trying to teach moral improvement without endless abstract scaffolding. Justus Lipsius, for example, drew on Stoic ideas to argue that ancient ethics could be useful for Christians, adapting them to new religious and political contexts. Many writers did not treat Stoicism as a museum piece; they experimented with it, mixing its vocabulary with Christian charity or emerging secular ideas. The result was a steady trickle of Stoic concepts into educational curricula, sermons, and the pamphlets that fueled political argument, often transformed to fit the aims of those who quoted them. Even today, the legacy appears in everyday examples. A teacher encouraging students to keep a short reflective diary is echoing Marcus's practice. A politician speaking about public duty and restraint borrows Stoic motifs whether they know it or not. Modern philosophers and public intellectuals still reach for Stoic phrases when arguing for resilience in the face of crisis, or for a common human reason that can underpin law and rights. And if you need a little amusement, think of Marcus as the author of the ancient bullet journal, rows of short reflections that, when read across centuries, quietly nudged European thought toward an ethic of self-governance, practical wisdom, and moral seriousness. How modern cognitive science meets Stoic techniques. Marcus Aurelius kept a private notebook full of short exercises and reminders that, by modern standards, look remarkably like tools cognitive scientists study today. He wrote down ways to change his own thinking, to notice unhelpful impressions, and to remind himself what he could actually control. These are not mysterious meditations, they are practical mental rehearsals. Cognitive science gives us language and experiments to explain why those rehearsals work. One clear overlap is the idea of reappraisal, changing how you interpret an event to change how you feel about it. Marcus advised examining a sudden anger or fear and asking whether the judgment behind it is true or useful. Modern therapists teach the same move with a simpler name and structured steps. For example, if a colleague snubs you in a meeting, you can flip from "they dislike me" to "they were distracted" or "this says more about their stress than my worth." The emotional temperature drops. It's like noticing your coffee is too hot before you burn your tongue. Another Stoic habit that lines up with current practice is journaling. Marcus used writing to test his thoughts, to rehearse better responses, and to track progress. Cognitive therapists use thought records for the same purpose: write the upsetting thought, note evidence for and against it, and create a balanced alternative. A parent who logs recurring bedtime battles can spot a pattern, maybe it's timing or tiredness, not willful misbehavior, and then experiment with a small change. Journaling makes inner noise visible, and visible things are easier to fix. Also, your handwriting improves, eventually. Maybe. Stoic negative visualization, mentally preparing for possible setbacks, matches what psychologists call stress inoculation or anticipatory coping. Marcus suggested briefly picturing losing comforts so you appreciate them and lose less footing if they go. In everyday life, that could mean thinking through a missed flight scenario so you don't panic and instead call alternatives calmly. Practicing that mental run-through reduces surprise and helps you act. It's not doom and gloom, it's practical rehearsal. Think of it like packing a tiny toolkit for when life decides to test your zipper. Attention training is another point of contact. The Stoics urged attention to the present task and clear separation between sense impressions and judgments. Modern research shows that training attention, learning to notice a thought as just a thought rather than a command, improves emotional control. A short, focused pause before replying to a hot text can change the whole conversation. In plain terms, noticing the urge to snap back gives you the space to respond like a grown-up, or at least like a less embarrassing version of yourself. Finally, Stoic practice and cognitive approaches both emphasize small, repeatable habits that build resilience over time. Marcus recommended quick checks throughout the day. Today's science calls this self-monitoring and habit formation. Try 2-minute checks, note your mood, name one unhelpful thought, and reframe it. Do that regularly and you wire new pathways in your brain, slowly, like updating an old map instead of building a highway overnight. The payoff is steady: fewer volcanic reactions, more choices, and the occasional smug satisfaction of realizing you didn't need to text back that savage emoji. None of this requires philosophical robes or lab coats. Simple experiments: write a 3-line thought record after a rough call, spend 5 minutes imagining a minor setback and how you would cope, pause for 3 breaths before answering, bring Stoic wisdom and cognitive science into everyday life. They meet on common ground: attention, framing, and small practices that change how we act and feel. And if you can laugh at yourself a little along the way, you're following in perfectly human, perfectly Stoic footsteps. Myths, misconceptions, and popular narratives. Marcus Aurelius combined the life of an emperor with the practices of a Stoic philosopher, and that combination is the root of many confusions. He kept a private set of reflections, what we call meditations, written in Greek as personal notes, not as polished public sermons. Stoic ideas he practiced are straightforward: focus on what you can control, accept what you cannot, and try to act with fairness and reason. In everyday terms, that might mean preparing calmly for a job interview instead of panicking about things you cannot change, like the interviewer's mood or the weather. One common myth is that Stoicism, and Marcus himself, meant never feeling anything. That is wrong. Stoicism teaches working with emotions, not burying them. When someone loses a pet, a Stoic would still feel sadness. The practice helps avoid letting that sadness turn into destructive behavior, like lashing out or ignoring responsibilities. Marcus wrote about duty and compassion as much as he wrote about endurance. He was far from a distant, unfeeling sage. He was a leader who worried about people, gave practical orders, and tried to balance personal grief with public duty. So think of Stoicism as a way to hold feelings with care, not as emotional exile. Another misconception is that the meditations were meant to be published as a textbook. In truth, they read like a private journal: short reminders to himself, repeated phrases, frank confessions. Modern quotations that pop up on social media often strip lines out of context and turn them into catchy soundbites. That can be useful, but it's misleading when those lines are used to promote a harsh mentality. For instance, a clip urging toughness can be used to justify cold management, when Marcus's actual notes also stress fairness and concern for others. A useful modern parallel: people keep personal notes in a phone journal, and pulling one sentence out of a private entry rarely tells the whole story. People also tend to cast Marcus as either a saintly philosopher or a purely cynical ruler. Reality sits in between. Leading an empire meant hard choices and compromises. Stoic ideas gave a frame for those choices but did not magically remove the messy political pressures he faced. This is similar to managers today who try to be ethical while navigating budget limits and competing teams. Another popular narrative treats Stoicism as purely Greek theory, disconnected from Roman life. Yet in Marcus's hands, Stoicism was practical and civic. It emphasized service, collective responsibility, and doing one's role well. That civic angle is often downplayed in modern readings that focus only on individual toughness. Finally, the recent surge of Stoic branding, apps, motivational posts, and corporate talks has flattened a deep practice into quick tips about grit and resilience. Some of these are helpful: pausing before reacting, rehearsing possible setbacks so they feel less shocking, and reminding yourself what you can change. But when Stoicism becomes only a sales pitch for relentless productivity or a way to dismiss others' struggles, it strays from Marcus's broader ethic. A practical takeaway: use Stoic tools to become steadier and kinder, not to harden into an excuse for indifference. That keeps the spirit of the teachings intact, and it also makes life a little more bearable when the train is late or your boss emails at midnight. Yes, it happens. Reading the Meditations as a scientific popular text. Marcus Aurelius left behind a body of short, personal reflections that read less like polished doctrine and more like field notes from a mind testing itself. Written as reminders and mental drills, these passages can be treated like popular science writing: clear claims about how to live, simple methods to try, and everyday examples you can test on yourself. The core is practical observation. Notice what you feel, name it, and experiment with different responses to see which one reduces needless suffering. This approach turns Stoic teaching from lofty advice into a trial-and-error toolkit anyone can use. Think of the Meditations as a lab notebook for the inner life. Start with a clear hypothesis. For instance, if first label an insult as someone else's opinion rather than an attack on my worth, first will feel calmer. Then run a small experiment. Next time someone criticizes your work, pause, take a breath, and silently reframe the comment as feedback rather than an identity threat. Keep a simple record. Did your anger drop? Did you respond more constructively? Simple charts are optional. A quick note in your phone works fine. The aim is not to prove a universal law but to find what reliably helps you in common situations like traffic, emails, or family spats. Many passages in the Meditations resemble techniques used in modern therapies that focus on changing thoughts to change feelings. The overlap is clear if you read like a curious reader rather than a classical scholar. For practical use, break down a short entry into a single skill: attention training, perspective shifting, or rehearsing a calm response. Try the attention exercise as an everyday experiment. Notice one negative thought when it appears, watch it for a minute without acting, and then decide whether it deserves your energy. This small test teaches that not every thought commands action. It's like discovering which emails truly need a reply and which can be archived unread. Real-life examples help. When someone cuts you off in traffic, the automatic story might be, "That driver is rude and wants to ruin my day." Apply a meditation-style test. Imagine practical alternatives. Maybe the driver is late for a child's appointment or lost. See if thinking of alternatives reduces your stress. Another quick trial: before responding to a harsh email, wait 5 minutes and rewrite your reply as if advising a friend. Compare outcomes. Sometimes the calmer response resolves things. Sometimes it doesn't. Both results teach you something, which is the point. A readable, science-popular stance also asks for small measurements you can keep up with. A simple mood scale: bad, okay, good, logged after practicing a Stoic exercise gives immediate feedback. Over time you'll notice patterns. and your brain will start treating the practice like a reliable experiment rather than mere wishful thinking. Humor helps. Practicing stoic calm in public won't turn you into a marble statue, though people might suspect you've discovered a secret relaxation app. The goal is gentler living, not emotional suppression. Finally, treat the meditations as an invitation to test, not to accept blindly. Pick one short maxim, apply it in 2 different situations, note what changed, and adjust. The text becomes a user's manual for the self when read this way: clear claims, low-cost experiments, and practical adjustments. That method keeps the philosophy alive, useful, and surprisingly modern, and it gives you a reason to smile when life behaves unpredictably. Marcus Aurelius taught a simple, useful message: focus on what you can control, accept what you can't, live with honesty and duty, and check your own thinking every day. Stoicism isn't about being a robot, it's about noticing your feelings, naming them, and choosing a better response. Think of it like deciding not to let a traffic jam ruin your whole day. You can't move the cars, but you can choose your playlist and your mood. He kept a private journal, the Meditations, where he wrote reminders to himself, like a no-nonsense self-care list. You can do the same in 5 minutes. Write one thing you did well today, one thing to improve, and one small act of kindness you'll try tomorrow. That tiny habit builds trust with yourself, like training a muscle. Remember the big ideas in plain terms: work on your actions, be kind because we're all in this together, expect change, nothing lasts forever, and refuse to be ruled by anger or fear. For example, when someone criticizes you at work, pause, ask if it's useful, and use what helps. Don't take the whole thing personally. If any of this resonated, try one Marcus move this week, a short journal entry or a calm breath before reacting, and tell us how it goes in the comments. If you liked this video, subscribe for more thoughtful bites, no toga required. Next time we'll look at simple, everyday exercises inspired by Stoics to handle stress, and then we'll profile Seneca and Epictetus, practical people who had surprisingly good advice for modern life. Thanks for watching. Take one steady breath, do one small right thing today, and first I'll see you in the next episode.